Bakuin, 7 out of 10. Offbeat Motorbike K-on! Parody manga is still fun, and now the ecchi is animated. High School Fleet movie, 7 out of 10. It's no DOS finale since those movies are kinda nutty, but still a very nice outing since under ordinary circumstances, I way prefer this cast and setting to Gup. The soundtrack had quite a selection of great tracks. Macross 0, 7.5 out of 10. Very pretty. Chili mentioned the people here who have watched it recently finding it bewildering for the franchise, but like the Giants and Trotty were something I didn't expect from Macross. Sharon Apple's instrumentality was something I didn't expect from Macross. The Proto-Devil being so powerful without a mech were something I didn't expect from Macross. Proto-culture spacetime rituals and a mythical demon biomech which threatens third impact aren't going to surprise me at this point. I have my reservations about it retconning to introduce proto-culture discussions even before SDF and the encountering of Zentradi, but meh. Delta also seemingly does that with Richeto Arkan, altering the original statement about Iobo Damasu Ka being just his song that was popular at the time, so I guess I can overlook this. Macross Dynamite 7, 8 out of 10. Aside from the obvious objections to the totally tone-deaf attempted date rape of Malene, in what is otherwise a light-hearted story about a funny man singing aggressively at aliens, I find everything else was simply utilizing the best parts of Macross 7, while remedying its horrendously repetitive snail pace by being, what is effectively, a movie. Unsurprising, considering this franchise's apparent affinity for film. Bizarra singing with the whale was the absolute coolest thing. And I always love those kind of boys will be dumb bromance jokes like Basara and Gamlin, both flying straight past Malene. Macross 7 Encore, 7 out of 10. More secrets and Trotty best girls appear, and a very nice new rendition of Light the Light. On that note, when I finished the series I stated that there were a minimal amount of tracks I particularly liked. But now that I've had some distance from the torment of hearing Planet Ants 3 times in every 22-minute episode, I've been quite enjoying letting Firebomber autoplay on Yaochu. They're so nice. Anyway, let's all love Basara. Macross Frontier, 8 out of 10. Probably the least ambitious Macross with the least punchy storytelling, but making up for it by just being generally solid. It neither dips nor peaks as intensely as SDF, 7 and Delta frequently do. Maybe that played a part in making it so easy to binge. Things definitely happened, but by the finale I didn't quite feel like the anime had really made its point. It just kind of happened. I'm not saying I missed the whole narrative about overcoming your blood or anything, but I dunno, after the opening act nothing felt quite as weighty as it did in other entries. But maybe that's my own fault for watching it in 3 days. Although with that said I did give it an 8, which is on the higher end of my Macross spectrum, so I was certainly a fan. That final 12-minute-long mashup was one of the most potent musical moments in the entire franchise, and the anti-Do You Remember Love sequence in the first phase of the final battle was quite an interesting idea too, though Delta obviously fleshes this scenario out more significantly. I think my most memorable moment might have been Ranka and Cheryl both aggressively courting Alto with the What Bout My Star duet. It's a short scene, and super cheesy, but I was so about it. Cheryl's legacy as a sex symbol precedes Macross as a whole, so I knew about that since long ago obviously, but I wasn't expecting so much snark from her. That was a welcome surprise. Ranka is not at all the janky girl I thought she would be, however. One cower bullying Ranka followed by another bullying Cheryl was perhaps not the most eloquent way of implementing a love triangle. Although I know it's the major Macross debate, I'm still not sure which camp I'm in. Cheryl is an absolute riot, but I really root for Ranka's happiness and found it quite refreshing how she's immediately like, "Ah frick, that boy is cute and I wanna do dates and stuff." But Cheryl is such a babe. So it's hard to tell. Also the soundtrack was incredible. I know this is where CDF will go, well obviously, it's Yoko Kanno, but honestly her compositions have never stood out to me before. Not enough to recognize her by name like I do someone such as Sujizu or Yasuharu. The only other thing I'm aware she did is Macross Plus, and that's only remembering the credit. I don't actually know that I had any impressions of the BGM. But the Space Symphonies were so powerful here. Mingi Momo and Yume ni Kokeru Hashi, 8 out of 10. An incredibly endearing little piece. The idea of the entire OVA taking place people watching on the one bridge is as ambitious as it is romantic. Mingi Momo and Tabadachi no Iki, 7 out of 10. This was dark and trippy, for some reason. Momo gets transported back in time, and the ultimate conflict is about trying to stop a war orphan from committing suicide. I thought this was a children's mahou shoujo. Mingi Momo, Yume no Naka no Rondo, 7 out of 10. Looks like it's gonna be a speed racer style wacky race, but then is actually a straight adaptation of the Peter Pan story. Neat. DS Anime Sishuhin 98, 5 out of 10. Noticed these existed so I watched them. I just really love the idea of the franchise. An offbeat dungeon crawler establishing the character's comically messed up history across a large amount of years that then randomly spins off into a cutesy puzzle game series at the end. Lol. Air is so damn sassy and I am all about it. First-person dungeon crawler was really not a genre I expected to enjoy, but if it's at this level, I think it's a surprisingly addicting little experience, and I appreciate that dipping my toes in here might help prepare me for Kaiwai Akumigami Tensei further down the line too. Future note. It did not. I've also stumbled upon quite a few good tracks. Anyway, all that was about the franchise. Whoops. The shorts were mostly nothing, but it was cool seeing the characters animated. Runes Pharmacy, 5 out of 10. Haha, wow, this sure is hentai. Wait, is that Sagita? Sakano Fine, 8.5 out of 10. Sickeningly sweet. On occasion I stumble upon romances that, in spite of their surroundings, are written with such an intimacy that it almost feels like one shouldn't be peering into their world. This is one of them, against all odds. Megumi and Tomoya's precarious chemistry, using its multi-layered motivations to create the illusion that it's far simpler than it actually is frankly brilliant. Although it's always been a component, the way that the film's production overtly embodies the masturbatory tone their wish fulfillment game scenario is centered on feels more potent here than in either of the previous entries. The meta element isn't anything new, but comes across as highly ambitious, incredibly well realized and subtly genius this time round. I never expected it to, but it hits its mark. Tales of Christoria: The Wake of Sin, 6 out of 10. I suppose from the little I've seen and played, any sense of thematic subtlety does not exactly seem to be this franchise's strong point. But the Herdurum evil dialogue aside, the mob mentality / cancel culture foundation of this entry seems like a neat idea, and is certainly a more fluent way of establishing anti-heroes than awkwardly pretend to be ambivalent at the end of every sentence. Velvet. Fate's Day Night Unlimited Blade Works movie, 8 out of 10. Fate is a good franchise. This was hella cool. Apparently even Dumbus UBW can become an absolute joy to watch if you manage to separate it from Ufitable's obtrusive compositing, unappealing art style and brain-dead dialogue. They didn't even mention Seigi no Mikado once. You have no clue how vindicating it felt to be presented with a version where I was able to fanboy during the Shiru vs Archer clash. Fate's Day Night Unlimited Blade Works Sunny Day, unrated. I have nothing in particular to say about this. Fate's Day Night Heaven's Feel 3 Spring Song, 7 out of 10. As strange as it is for me, I just still don't have any particularly developed thoughts on this entry. Musings about Sakura is the central subject matter? Sure, I can vomit that out. But the film specifically? Well, it happened. It was good. I enjoyed it. It doesn't inspire any meaningful discussion or review in me, and it was nice to finally revisit the cinema in 2020 isn't exactly a worthwhile reflection. The soundtrack was as striking as the first two films, there were a few sick fights, and Sakura is still best heroine. That much remains true. There were some abilities and moments that felt kinda off, namely the look how cool I am 9 Lives blade works, and Shiru getting the blades jutting out of his body as a heavy-handed archer is the bone of his sword. Haha, do you get the reference imagery? But obnoxious heavy-handed delivery is just par for the course in Fate's Day Night Baby. As far as the movies go, 2-3-1. It skimps on the sexual storytelling that accidentally made the second my favorite of Ufitable's Fate, but is still better than the first film, even if only because Shinji is dead and Zouken barely has any presence. Sakura is always such a difficult character to reconcile. On one hand, she's easily my favorite of the main heroines, yes. I've mentioned it a few times before, but cohabitation romcom has always been right near the top of my favorite genres. Accordingly, I adore the Sakura route. Watching her and Shiru just live and flirt together brings me such immense happiness. If Chobits, Here Comes the Fiancé, Nadanade Shikashiko or even Nobunaga-sensei Noa Senizuma are any indication, you can make me like something purely by having the two romantic leads abruptly become housemates. It's the coziest of settings. Sakura is always the best character in the spin-offs too. Whether it's using her hidden yandere tendencies for very potent punchlines, or taking a more meta stance as she flaunts her voluptuous body and romanticizes herself as a woe-is-me maiden, spin-off Sakura is an absolute riot. But as much as I enjoy her performance, I also think that the Matu are by far the worst piece of writing in the entire franchise. Zouken is an annoyance that actively jeopardizes Fate's narrative integrity just by existing. Shinji is an unironic mistake that actively compromises the entire franchise, and Nasu's credibility as a writer just by existing. The Dumbus penis worms and constant rape are not some kind of mature or dark aspect, it's nothing more than a repulsive display of fetishism on the lowest level. Heck, I'll say it, they're just as terrible as any low-hanging Sao villain that gets 100 times more hate. There's a lot that I dislike in the FSN story, but these are the biggest blight upon it. When Shinji ends the second film screwing up his face and laughing as he says "Shall," I tell him how filthy all our rapes have been. I do not go man, I hate Shinji, I go man, I hate whoever wrote this, they're a moron. As a concise summary of my criticisms, I often refer to Fate Stay Night as something pretending to be good, and promising that this claim is certainly something possible. The Matu, as the largest offenders of FSN's crappy writing, are also the largest offenders embodying this assertion. Nasu seems to preoccupy most people with his excessive yet highly fascinating lore, to the point of distracting one from seeing how basic and dumb smelly poo-poo so much of the rest of the writing is. While Sakura's psychosexual turmoil may initially appear as expansive as her gigantic purple-haired boobies, with every broken shard of her fractured personality reflecting a new understanding of her inner makeup, on closer inspection, she is as flat as the Shikigami that accompany her. Curse the Matu, curse Fate Stay Night, and curse Nasu. They're all terrible. But also I did give this a 7 and enjoyed watching it because the fights were flashy, Sakura is cute, and there were a handful of interesting character moments. Such as the duality of Fate Stay Night, stuck so far up its own pretentious ass that it somehow manages to tread or even create the precarious line of pretending that it's better than it actually is. The Matu suck, and in fact despite often praising Sakura, she's actually just as bad. She is the centerpiece, after all. My word, what a terrible character she is. I love her throughout the franchise, but damn. However, perhaps it might be more accurate to say that Sakura is not wholly a shallow character, but a shallow experience. Realistically, there can be a degree of obtuse and unnecessary, but still technically present, complexity in some facets of her operation, but they're largely worthless because they stem from the flimsy setting that forms her. Neither the thematic message nor her personal story necessitate such a graphic and overwhelming depiction of her suffering, and thus being included, it likewise accomplishes nothing of significance. Nasu bullies her so hard without a truly justifiable reason that it totally compromises any suspension of disbelief her root may have once held, and then at the end of it, the storytelling suggests he wishes to be praised for dealing with the unhealthy home situation. The character arc can't help but feel cheap, since she's unapologetically designed as the most misfortunate girl possible to the point it almost feels like one sick parody, so her cries about how Rin never knew hardship are exceedingly hollow, and indeed only carry any real weight once Rin gives the meaning by appropriating them to illustrate her own sociopathy, and any momentary happiness for her is not quite hard-earned, but more like a masturbatory act of justice on part of the scenario. Her story of unrelenting sexual, physical and psychological abuse is unfortunately flat torture porn with no semblance of finesse, balance or vision, intending only to make the viewer go "Yeah, we did it guys, we defeated the strawman, we are good people, and everything is great together with my big booby wife." It spends the entire time tormenting her as if holding up a big metaphysical please cry cue card, only to jerk itself off once it pulls her out of that situation and says "Okay, you can clap now." She's as one note as Shinji is, to be frank. I just forgive her because she has big boobs. Yet even still, it can't be denied that a large part of why I like the character so much stems from this psychosexual turmoil she works through, and the way it informs the abusive, highly destructive relationship she forms with Shiru. But again, this all just comes as a side effect of